Nate Landman is back from injured reserve. Just how triumphant will his return be for the Falcons' run defense?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. the Iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a very long time, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers that make this podcast your first listen or first watch each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, I am joined by none other than Tre'Shon Diaz, who covers the Atlanta Falcons for the Falcoholic. You may recall Tre'Shon making his triumphant debut on this podcast 2 years ago during our Senior Bowl coverage, live from I think an Airbnb living room.
That's right.
And talking about, I can't remember who we were giddy about during that Senior Bowl. It feels like it was so long ago, but he is back to talk more about the Atlanta Falcons. We'll be talking about the offense, the defense. Do they need to be more balanced on offense? What are some of the ways that this defense can improve? And one of those ways may be potentially the triumphant return of Nate Landman from injured reserve. For those of you that missed the news, on Monday, he was designated to return from the injured reserve after missing the past 4 games. That opens up a 3-week window in which he can return to the 53-man roster. He's not officially there yet. And obviously, that could happen as early as this week. Before the Falcons face the Carolina Panthers on Sunday, or potentially as late as their Week 8 rematch against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But Tre'Shon, I put it to you, how big a deal is this for the Falcons defense?
Yeah, this is a pretty big deal for the Falcons defense, especially, and I know it's something that you've talked about extensively, and that's, the state of the run defense overall right now has just not been good. And, Nate Landman's return could mark the change of that and going towards the direction that we need it to start going.
Okay. So I'm going to say something controversial on today's episode. I don't know if Nate Landman's going to be that impactful, because the question I have is he going to be an every down player, right? Mm-hmm. That, when we look at Nate Landman's role in the one game that he's played so far this year, was entirely working in the base defense against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And when the Falcons were in nickel, they would take him off the field and put Troy Anderson in. Obviously, now Troy Anderson is dealing with an injury. We'll see what his status is later this week. But I don't know if the Falcons will be playing that much base defense over the next couple of games whenever Nate Landman returns, because Carolina, Seattle, and Tampa Bay primarily operate out of 11 personnel. Over 70% of their snaps come out of 11 personnel, which is 3 wide receiver sets, which the Falcons consistently match up with their nickel defense. So I guess I'm curious, do you feel like it's time to make Nate Landman a full-time 3-down, every down defensive end? Because if not, I feel like most of the Falcons' run issues basically come when they're in their nickel defense and have lighter boxes, and teams are basically able to just kind of punch them in the mouth. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think I'm not expecting Nate Landman to become a 3-down linebacker. My expectations for him have always been that he's, 2-down linebacker, and that's kind of really, his ceiling. So with that being said, I think we might see the Falcons adjust the amount of nickel that they roll out and maybe start to try to, see if there's other ways that they can get the defense going and kind of give the run game a little bit more support on that end. The nickel defense has, to your point, been a bit of a disappointment when we're looking at, trying to stop the run. And I agree that Nate Landman is certainly not going to become a 3-down defensive end for this team. But I still think that he can carve out a role and that they can find ways to get him on the field to help the team out.
Okay. Yeah, I think he moves the needle. I just don't know if I've seen a lot of rhetoric over the last couple of days, or the last day, I guess, since he got activated, which is like, oh, this is gonna solve the Falcons' run defensive issues, and it's like I don't think it is, but I think it should be better, right? I think they're like 28th in run defense right now, so I think Nate Landman can get them to 25th or something like that. That's an improvement. I don't know if they're going to suddenly become the top 5 run defense like they were a year ago, but we'll sort of have to see. I'll be curious to see how the Falcons deploy Nate Landman. Obviously, I think Troy Anderson's health is going to impact that, because if Anderson is healthy to return this week against Carolina, my expectation is you'll probably see something similar to what we saw in week 1, but unlike the Pittsburgh Steelers with Arthur Smith and all the 75 tight ends that he likes to put on the field, where you tend to play a lot of base defense against that. Some of these teams I don't think are going to necessarily ask that. And so I wonder, rather than that sort of 50, 55, 45 split that we saw in week 1, it might be more of a 75-30 split, or 75-25 split. Sorry, I can't do math. In someone like Troy Anderson's favor when they're both back healthy. But we'll have to sort of see on that front. But talking about Nate Landman's return and how much it improves the defense, let's talk about how much improvement the defense needs to make. And so we'll pick Tre'Shon's brain on just how good this defense is and some of the ways that he think they can make improvements as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members, because it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, because unlike other apps, Prize Picks is just you versus the numbers. You just pick more or less on up to 6 players' stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. If you're looking to get in on the action because certain sports books aren't available in your state, don't worry, Prize Picks is, and withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure, and I can get my money in as quickly as 15 minutes. So check it out, downloading the Prize Picks app today, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 instantly when you play $5, and you can play that $5 on Bijan Robinson's more or less projections of 72 rushing yards, Darnell Mooney 54 receiving yards, Kirk Cousins 238 passing yards. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. So I'm here with Tre'Shon Diaz of the Falcoholic, and I have 4 words for you, Tre'Shon. Is this defense good?
No, this defense is not good. this defense is not good. And I think we've seen them come up big. I think this defense has, if you want to call it the clutch factor, or just kind of the ability to finish and make those plays when you need them. Like, this defense has obviously put that on tape, and they've been able to do that. But when we look at the product overall, it's tough to say that we're seeing a good defense, on Sundays to Thursday and Monday.
Yeah, and one of the things I've talked about this for years on this podcast. There's kind of 6 measures of defensive output, rather than just looking at points allowed or yards allowed, as a lot of people do to measure defense and just kind of cherry pick whichever one they think fits their narrative. So if you have a higher or lower yards or points allowed, they're just like, oh, this is an 11th ranked defense, and whatever. But one of the things, 6 categories, I think it give you a more holistic view of defense, and it's your ability to stop the run, your ability to rush the quarterback, third down defense, red zone defense, creating turnovers, and limiting explosive plays. In those 6 areas, the Falcons are 28th currently in run defense. They're 32nd in pass rush. They're 32nd in third down defense. They're 13th in red zone. They're 19th in generating turnovers, and they're first in limiting explosive plays. So they are an elite team when it comes to, not giving up the big plays. Not so elite in the other areas. And so I'm curious, Tre'Shon, when you hear stats like that, like, obviously there's areas where there's plenty of room to improve. Is there something that you sort of, as you've been watching the film these last 5 games, feel like the Falcons can make an adjustment that can lead to some improvements in one or more of those areas?
Yeah, just hearing you list off those stats kind of reminds me of like the Dean Pease era a little bit. where the Falcons were very good at limiting. There was like a stat out there where it's like they haven't allowed a big 20 plus yard or whatever it was for so many days, but teams were just kind of able to do whatever they want. And similar to how we were all focusing on the offense, and I think it's still a focus when we look at third downs, it's kind of where my biggest concern is for this defense is their inability to get off on third down. In terms of what they can do to try and, get some improvement, I think it's just going to be something as simple as giving other guys more opportunities, adjusting some of the snap counts, kind of playing around with the personnel. I feel like they've been a little bit rigid with what they've wanted to do, and we've seen them slowly start to tweak guys' counts. And 2 weeks ago, Taquan Graham saw a big boost. Last week, we saw Rook hit the field. It would be interesting to see if they can start to maybe play with Zach Harrison's numbers a little bit more. Maybe just kind of look and see, personnel wise, if they've got some moves that they can make. I don't feel that they are really going to do anything, big from a schematic standpoint. I think Jimmy Lake and Raheem Morris are, kind of happy and comfortable, maybe would be the better word, with kind of what they're getting as it stands. So I think it's just going to come down to how are you managing that personnel.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Yeah, I was thinking about it earlier today. And yeah, I think there's probably going to be a lot of people pushing for personnel changes, particularly with the trade deadline coming up in about a month. And, for me, at least, I don't know how much personnel is going to change, because I feel like a lot of their issues are schematic issues. And it just feels like, I don't know if this scheme is really built to maximize their personnel, because like 75% of the personnel is the same personnel that they had last year. And, they were top 5 run defense last year, and they were top 5 red zone defense last year, and the top 5 third down defense last year. And they were at least closer to middle of the pack in terms of the pass rush. And it's like, you bring all those same players back, or at least most of those players back. And theoretically, you've upgraded the 25% that you've changed with like guys like Matthew Judon and Justin Simmons, and even, James Smith-Williams doing some good work as a run defender, and some of the rookies. And like, you're not getting improvement. And so like, to me, like, what's the one thing that's changed? It's not really the personnel, it's the scheme that's sort of changed. So I think your point about, are they incentivized to change? Like, as long as the team is winning, I don't think there's really any incentive to make an adjustment. Like, you've won 60% of your first 5 games through arguably the hardest stretch of games that you've had this season. And, this defense has been, as you say, good enough in certain situations, late game situations, to help you win those games. And if you win 60% of your remaining 12 games, that's a 10-win season. So it's just kind of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Although I guess the question is it actually broke?
Yeah. And I'm with you that I think that it is not, broken. I don't know if it ever, kind of even started working in the first place, but this is kind of one of the few times where, the conversation about safety play and, how much of a difference does adding a safety make? We saw the boost that Jesse Bates brought, and Justin Simmons has been, a very valuable addition and a good player for this team. But to your point, when we bring back 75% of the roster and the big upgrade is another safety, and then, Matthew Judon, is the Justin Simmons move really adding, to the defense what we needed it to add? Are we, did the pass rush really get a big boost from his signing? Is he really helping out with the run defense? All these other things that we're kind of like discussing. And it's like, he's a very nice player to have, but it's kind of like a bonus in terms of what we need right now. And what we need is, some better play along the defensive line, if we really want any hope of fixing this run defense.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So we'll see if, tweaking the snap counts, getting Rook out there a little bit more, Brandon Dorris eventually making his debut, Nate Landman's return, all those various things, if it leads to better defensive play, and we'll see improvement in those areas. Again, it's 5 weeks into the season. It's not the end of the world or anything like that. There's certainly, I watching the Bucs game, you saw much better play in the second half. And I don't know if it was because they dramatically changed how they were playing. It was like, to me, the only real schematic difference was like they were rushing 3 instead of dropping 8, and they seemingly were getting pressure more when they were rushing 3, which is sort of counterintuitive. But I don't know. I'm curious, when you watched the second half of the Bucs game, was there anything that sort of stood out to you, or was it just simply guys going out there and executing better?
Yeah. When the performance flipped in the Saints game, it was kind of like, okay, feels like maybe injuries played a little bit of a part there. It didn't really seem like many things changed. And then to your point, again, felt the same way, going into the second half against the Bucs. It's kind of like, it doesn't really seem like they've done anything different. Um, you know, I think David Onyemata obviously had a better game, and we saw him, get that win on his sack, which, to your point, was a 3-man rush. So I don't really think anything major changed or happened. It really did just kind of come down to execution, and I think they did a better job of winning their one-on-ones. So, to your point earlier, I do wonder if they are getting a little lost in kind of some of the, big clutch moments and things like that. And they're just kind of holding on to it like, hey, if we can just get execution to be a little bit more consistent, like everything else is going to level itself out. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but it is only week 5, or we've only played 5 weeks, I should say. So who knows? Maybe they can level it out with a little bit of better execution. But so far, there hasn't really been anything schematically we've seen change.
Yeah. So clearly, the potential is them to play better defense, as we saw in the second half of the Bucs game. So I think that's the thing that we got to hold on to and be like, okay, like, I don't love the scheme, but it's like we've seen them execute the scheme well at times, and we just need to see them do it more consistently at times. So we'll see if the Falcons defense can do that. But we'll move on talking about the Falcons offense, and we've seen a shift in their, run pass balance over the last 2 games. And, does that mean this is kind of what the new identity of the Falcons offense is going to be? And we'll break that down here with Tre'Shon Diaz of the Falcoholic as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. NFL fans, make sure you start the season big with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So whether it's getting that hunch in the middle of the game and feeling like, hey, I think something's going to happen in the second half of this game, you can go to the same page where you place your bets, where you can also view the latest stats and live play-by-play over at FanDuel. And make sure you get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Maybe you want to place that bet on the Falcons' upcoming Week 6 matchup against the Carolina Panthers, where they are currently 6.5-point favorites against Carolina. Will we see the Falcons blow out Carolina, or will it be another close game that goes down to the final minute? We'll find out. Take advantage of it by heading over to FanDuel.com. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And time is a precious commodity, and sometimes, you find yourself disappointed with how much time you're wasting scrolling mindlessly on your phone. And you often think, I know I often think this, I could probably be using this time more wisely, looking for ways to improve myself. And one of the ways is improving myself from the neck up. And thankfully, our sponsor, Hillsdale College, has a offer for more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses that are going to help my brain get right with history, politics, economics, philosophy, chemistry, mathematics. All their courses are self-paced, so you can start whenever, and you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or you could just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost. It's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon. So wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons with Tre'Shon Diaz of the Falcoholic. And, Tre'Shon, through the first 3 games, the Falcons run pass balance. They ran the ball 45% of their offensive plays. The last 2 games, they've only run the ball about 25% of their offensive plays. For those curious, the NFL average through 5 games this year is just shy of 44%, which is the highest run rate that we've seen in the NFL since 2009. Teams are getting back to establishing the run, in part due to teams playing soft nickel defenses and all these various things that we've already kind of touched upon. And I'm sure you can find other articles written by folks else out there breaking this stuff down across the league and some of that trend. But I'm curious, is the last 2 weeks of basically being very heavily favoring the passing game, is it just simply, hey, we're beat up front on the offensive line, and once Drew Dalman and Caleb McGarry are both back fully healthy again, we're going to get back to establishing the run? Or do you think, based off of the success of the team the last 2 weeks, that they should continue to lean on their passing game, maybe not to the degree that they did against Tampa Bay, but if Kirk Cousins is getting more comfortable in this offense, you paid him $180 million. It's a lot of money to be paying to a quote unquote game manager who's just going to hand the ball off. Do you feel like they need to lean more on Cousins in that passing game to kind of carry their offense moving forward?
Yeah, I agree with your comment there. We all expected Cousins to be a game manager, and the price tag for that seemed awfully high. But then Kirktober happened, and we saw Cousins put up 509 yards on Matt Ryan night. So I think there will be, especially I think Zach Robinson, if he can, would like to spread the ball out more through the air. Seems to be much more comfortable dialing up those pass plays than he is with the run concepts right now. I think part of the issue with the run does come from, offensive line health, but there's just been no desire to get off of the outside zone either. So it's tough for me to say that, well, the offensive line is really just failing this team, because at a certain point it's like, okay, well, when do they get the opportunity to kind of run something else that maybe, kind of fits the current skill set that we have along that starting five? And we just haven't seen Robinson make that adjustment. I think we're going to see him slowly, kind of start to work on that, maybe implement some gap concepts, maybe just kind of do something to help ease the pain, especially, in the interior, where I think that's kind of where, more of the worry is right now with Dalman being out. But I don't really have an issue with them leaning on Kirk, because, he's getting paid what he's getting paid. And if he's able to, step up and shoulder some of the weight when the offense needs him to, then I say, ride the hot hand. And, if we go out, dying on Kirk Cousins' arm, then, that's what happens. But there definitely has to be some changes, with whatever, with the run game right now.
Yeah, you're right. It is Kirktober, so might as well lean into it. And then there's Kirk Bimber right after that. So, we got a couple months of leaning on the passing game. Again, I don't think throwing the ball, you're dropping back to throw the ball 62 times is something that I want to see, but probably, throwing the ball 30, 35 times a game, I think probably makes sense for this offense. I know you've been praising of Darnell Mooney on Twitter and elsewhere. I have not been on this podcast, so we'll give you the floor to express your praise of Darnell Mooney so that people can at least get their Darnell Mooney love at least once in a blue moon on this podcast.
Yeah. When we signed Mooney, I'm not even going to pretend that I was out there saying, this is a certified wide receiver 2. We just, all this, that, the other, we just got to steal. I was definitely like, we're paying a high end 13 million a year. This is a little nerve wracking. We'll see how it pays out for him. And I'm not a fan of the separation stats that have seemingly taken over as the, this is what determines if a receiver is good or not. I know you've been out there fighting the good fight, telling people, hey, this isn't actually telling you how often a receiver gets open on every play. It just tells you if the defender was close to him or not when he actually got the ball thrown to him. Mooney was somebody that everybody said, hey, this guy gets open. All he does is get open. It's just Fields. He's missing him. And yeah, sometimes you would see that. And other times you would see a receiver who just didn't really look that good. And Mooney still has some moments, where he drops ball occasionally. I think on, that backside shoulder, he's got one drop on that exact pass every game so far. It's like Kirk is just gonna keep throwing it until he catches it. But I'm like, there it is. There's the one for today. And unfortunately, it was like a touchdown last week. But it kind of feels like we got our Calvin Ridley back, and we've got a guy that's able to get separation at the top of his routes in ways that no other receiver on the team can. He's been a great outlet for Kirk. Kirk clearly feels very comfortable going to Mooney. Best case scenario, I was like, hey, this could be our Jordan Addison, but I was really kind of tongue in cheek when I was saying that, because I was like, man, I just didn't see it coming. So love to be proven wrong, because when I'm usually wrong, it means something good happened to the Falcons. So, Mooney going off and really kind of, living up to that contract has been really good for this offense. And the speed has been a very nice addition, and was definitely worried after we lost Moore. Not that I expected him to be, a top receiver for this team, but just kind of, anytime you lose speed like that, it makes you nervous, because, the only other person we have is Mooney.
Yeah. I was talking with the Locked On Falcons insiders, link in the description below if you want to join, doing the extended all 22 review. And, the back shoulder stuff to Mooney is very frustrating to me, because I'm like, you have Drake London. You have Drake London at home. Why are you throwing back shoulders to Darnell Mooney? But, hey, it is what it is. But you're right. Outside of that, he's looking very Calvin Ridley-esque, and we'll see if eventually I have to come off of this hill, with Darnell Mooney. But he has been playing great football so far this season. So we'll see how that continues. If we can get just a few less, just throw the back shoulders to Drake, stop the swing passes, and then like everything else with Mooney is great outside of those two things. But we'll see if Zach Robinson takes my advice, or the intern that's currently listening to the Locked On Falcons podcast that passes up these conversations up the food chain down in Flowery Branch. We'll pass that advice up to Zach Robinson and Raheem Morris. So we'll see on that. But Trey, appreciate you joining me on today's episode. Let the people know some of the stuff you're working on, where they can find your other stuff.
Yeah, thanks again for having me, Aaron. I really appreciate it. You guys can find me at the Falcoholic. I've been writing for the outlet this year. If you're curious why Kyle Pitts was able to have a better game, you could have found out a week early what they needed to do in order to make that happen. So, come through, check out some of the work, and hopefully you like what you see.
Yes. And you touched upon it again with the GPS data. Again, I don't think people understand it. It's just dots on the screen and a computer basically saying like, this is what happened on the play. And it's just like, it's not football. Like, it's not, again, I'm a film snob, so clearly I'm biased on this, but it's just like one of those things where it's just like, you're just feeding dots on a screen into a computer, and you're basically spitting out some I use the air quotes analytics, because it's not really analytics. It's just a stat that people made up. But again, I'll die on that hill all day long. There's usage for the GPS data, but I think it's taking over too much a little bit, where people are trusting what they're seeing on some of that stuff. I'm like, separation score is great. Yeah, so that's a rant for another day. I'll save that for another day. Appreciate you, Trey, coming on and bringing it up. I'm all fired up here at the end of the episode. But thank you for joining me on today's episode. Of course, we'll be back tomorrow with a crossover Thursday with Julian Council of Locked On Panthers to preview this upcoming Week 6 matchup against the Carolina Panthers. And we'll see if the Falcons can, get back to offensive balance, improving the defense, and just how big an impact Nate Landman potentially could make with his potential return on Sunday. And that's all in store for you on tomorrow's Locked On Falcons. Continue to make us your first listen by subscribing and following for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And for your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast with 2 shows daily, giving you the lowdown on what's going on with the other 31 NFL teams, including what's going on with the Jets, firing their head coach, Robert Saleh. Check out Locked On Jets. Check out Locked On NFL. You'll get some great takes on that big move. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.